Welcome to Simple Conversation with ASG.
Follow your new favorite podcast host with a link in the description.
So, tell me, who is Kim Curry?
Well, I'm a 33-year radio broadcaster who spent time in Washington, D.C., Baltimore, San Antonio, Texas, Knoxville, Tennessee, but I spent 25 of 33 years in Miami, Florida. Radio broadcaster / program director. I was a DJ on the radio station and eventually became the boss of the radio stations I was working at. At the age of 50, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which, because of the intensity of the condition at the time, I was forced out of the radio broadcasting business. I spent about 8 years fighting MS, thinking serious things were happening to me, and that people really do die from things that happen around multiple sclerosis. And it kind of scared me for a while and really changed my life. My wife and I had to move across the country and figure out what the best doctors, who the best doctors were, and where we could get the best medical care. About 8 years into my condition, my doctors changed my medicine. I've not gotten any worse. I've not gotten any better since about 2013. So since then, I've become a writer. I have written my memoir, which goes over my radio career, which was quite exciting and more fun than people should expect. I wanted to write about my diagnosis and the changes my wife and I went through after the diagnosis. And I also wanted to write and inform people about the fact that it costs to be disabled in America. We're supposed to be the richest, most popular country on the planet, but we have terrible health care. And I knew it before I was diagnosed. But when I was diagnosed, it really became to the forefront. And I really realized that we really have a terrible medical system here in America. So that's kind of it. I write books now. I've got a couple of other books out that are historic fiction books. And that's who I am, and that's what I do.
Amazing story. I always think it's so funny hearing people from America talk about how much it costs for medical bills and stuff in America, because I'm from Ireland, grew up in Ireland, we have free healthcare. So it's always hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that people have to basically pay to stay alive.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, there's a bunch of different reasons about why it happens to us, but it's really pretty simple. The corporations own the system, and they do what they want to, regardless of what the people want. And the corporations have all tied themselves, the lobbyists in the healthcare system have all tied themselves to congressmen. And they vote because they vote positive in favor of the healthcare system because of the money they're getting. It's terrible. We need to get money out of politics in America. And we need to start taxing the church. But those are just personal opinions. Sorry.
I'm sure we'll come back to the subject in a later part of it. But I want to ask you about this because whenever I was doing my research on you, I was trying to figure out how you got into broadcasting, because any guest that I bring on, I don't know what it is, maybe it's my OCD, but I need to know how it started. I need to know how it got there. But your start to radio is very, very different to anybody else. Is it right in saying you were basically asked to babysit a radio station while the host was away?
Well, here's what I did. My dad worked at the only radio station in my hometown of Canyon City, Colorado. There's only one station. And my dad worked there. And I was in high school. And the way that I made my money was I would babysit my parents' friends' kids. And so one day my dad came home from work and he said, "Hey, they need you to babysit at the radio station." And in my mind, I thought, well, that means the boss of the radio station wants me to babysit his kids. So when I went up to the station to talk to him about it, he said, "No, that's not what you're here for. We need you to babysit the radio station because on Sunday mornings, they would record all the church services around town. And then the following Sunday, they would play those church services back on the radio, and nobody wanted that job. So they needed a high school kid, and they found me through my dad. And my job was to go up there on Sunday morning and get the tapes all ready and play all these church services one after another, which was a job nobody else wanted. But the fact that when you get to be on the radio and the very simple motion of doing the station identification, going on the radio to hear my voice for the first time in headphones, I liked it. I was immediately drawn to radio. And just because I used to go there and run tapes on Sunday morning, that's how I got started, because my dad got me the job at the radio station. So from there, I quickly went to college for a couple of years at the University of Southern Colorado, at the time called Southern Colorado State College. And I was going there to major in music because I was a trumpet player and in all the plays in my high school. And I thought that I was going to be a music teacher somewhere. But just about 6 months before graduation is when I got the job to go run those tapes on the radio station. And that's when I became interested in becoming a broadcaster. So I kind of dropped my major of music and turned it over to a broadcast major. Spent 2.5 years in college studying radio before I got my first full-time job.
What was it about that first kind of radio job that got you hooked straight away?
I got to be honest with you, man. It's something as crazy as, like I said, I was a trumpet player. I was in all the plays in my high school. I was a liberal arts man, and acting was probably something that was in my soul somewhere. And in radio, that's what basically you are. If you think about it, back in those days, radio broadcasters became TV stars, and those TV stars became movie stars. So somewhere along the line, when I first heard my voice on the radio, I thought, gee, I could do this radio thing and maybe I could become a star someday. And, I did kind of become a big radio star. All the markets that I worked in over the 33 years of my career, I had great success. So that was what I did. That's how I got started. And that's what it was. It was just the ego, hearing yourself on the radio going, hey, this is fun.
Yeah, it's always a contrast between people, whether they like or don't like to hear their own voice. Because I even notice it with people that I'm friends with who are podcasters. There's some of them that they'll share their own stories and they'll add their own personal inputs to their podcast because they like the sound of their own voice. Then there's others that just dive in questions and hope the guest takes over.
Yeah, there's science behind that. When you and I are speaking, you hear yourself from your inner ear. But when you put a set of headphones on, suddenly you're hearing what comes out of your mouth through the headphones for the first time. And those two things don't match. So that's why you hear DJs, and we used to make a real joke about this a long time ago when I was a young DJ, but you hear some disc jockeys end up talking like this because they try to make their voice sound like what they're used to hearing in their ear because they're now hearing themselves from the headphones. So that's why you've got guys who ended up, we used to call it puking. He's puking when he's talking because he's trying to match his current voice, the voice he hears in his inner ear with the voice he's hearing in the headphones. And it made a lot of goofy sounding radio DJs in the world. So
how did you get from the position of recording the tapes and playing back the church announcements to being the actual broadcaster, being the main focus?
Well, that's what I went to college for. So, I just had graduated high school. There was a good broadcasting mass comm class over at the college about 30 miles away from my home. And that's where I went. And I went there and I studied from the very beginning, the beginning broadcaster classes, where you have to learn how to write news copy. And then you have to learn how to write commercial copy, which is different than news copy. News is all about facts. Commercials are all about making things up. But we learned how to, we learned things like formatics, like what songs played the best at what time during the hour. The best song to play at the top of the hour was always one of the most popular songs. And that's the things we had to learn through research. And we learned how to do research about radio. So after a couple of years, actually a couple of months of being in my college classes, I got the nerve up to go audition and send air checks, audition tapes of my show to the local radio stations in Pueblo, Colorado. There were two very famous radio stations there back then. One was called KDZA, the other was KKAM. And I went and applied to KKAM and got a part-time weekend job. So I went from my high school to the little radio station in my hometown, went over to college and spent a couple of months practicing over there, and then applied to have a part-time job on the radio, top 40 current music radio station. And that's where I got my first job. And I spent about 2.5 years doing 1 day a week on the top 40 radio station. And that was just my practice to learn how to get a real big radio job, which I finally did get about 2.5 years after getting into college.
Yeah, I was reading on you. It was you were put as the interim program director first, and then you pretty much put yourself in a position where they couldn't hire anyone else because you were doing so well. Is that correct?
Well, at the end of my career, the last 9 years of my career, I'd been working for the same famous radio guys my entire career, and I'd learned a lot from these guys. And it seemed to me that the natural progression would be that they would go off and retire, and then I would take over as the program director because I was working with them the most and had the most knowledge. Well, strangely enough, the guy who was the program director got fired, and they made me the interim program director while they searched around the country to find the right guy that they wanted to work for them. Well, that search went on for 6 months, but while the big bosses were looking at the possible new guy, I was in charge of the radio station, so I started making my own changes, things that I figured that we could do that would increase the audience. And within the months of me doing that, for the 6 months that they were looking for a new boss, the ratings started going up. And that's really what the whole idea of the radio station is. Bring a program director in, and hopefully he makes the changes that make the ratings go high. And that's what happened. I kind of like set myself in the position. I decided that I was going to be the guy that was going to run the radio station. In my mind, I've just made the changes I thought would work, and they worked. So eventually, they would come in like once every couple of weeks and say, well, here's the new guy we're auditioning to be the program director of the radio station. The whole time while I'm sitting there going, it should be me. So they would be bringing these guys in once a week, once every couple of weeks. And I just look at them and go, okay, well, good luck. Meanwhile, the radio station's ratings were going up, and I knew I was going to get the job. So just one of those things.
What changes were you putting on to make the radio grow much bigger than it was?
Well, you have to remember that Miami is a multilingual town. And we were a top 40 type radio station. So we played all the Billboard top 40 songs, those kind of songs, all the songs that were in the top 10 on Billboard or Radio and Records magazines. Those were the songs that everybody that played top 40 in South Florida, they all did. Well, I thought that what would make us unique, because we had such a high Spanish population and everybody was bilingual, I even spoke a little bit of Spanish. I thought, well, let's go out and find out what the top songs in the Latin top 40 are, and we'll play some of those to go with American top 40. So you had the current music that were the big hits in America. I interspersed them with the current big hits that were in Latin America, and it just grew. It was the right thing to do, because in Miami, that's who you are. You're American and you're Spanish, and most of the time you're bilingual, because that's just the market breakdown. And it worked out real well. The ratings went up really high, and they were the highest ratings in the history of the radio station, and kind of made me famous. Only problem was, after the 9 years, I got diagnosed with MS. So I was at the pinnacle of my career when the multiple sclerosis took over. And then I had to leave that job because the condition was really ripping me hard. It was not good.
Yeah, I did kind of want to go into that, but I'm trying to think of a way to frame it, just to give the audience a bit more of like an overview. Is there any way that you can kind of give a quick breakdown on how it developed and how quickly it kind of developed?
Well, it's funny that, my whole life I had, hang on one second. I had a condition. The multiple sclerosis was flaring up throughout my entire life. It started back in 5th grade when I couldn't feel the bottom of my feet. I was in a running contest and my feet weren't working correctly. So I kept falling over in this contest, but that was in 5th grade. Later in life, my right eye would start to fade and my hand would start to curl up. And I thought I'd been bitten by fire ants or maybe a killer bee. So these things that were happening throughout my life, my vision dimming and my hand curling up and my toes starting to look dysfunctional, that stuff was going on my whole life. But when I was 49 years old, it really got bad. The things that were coming and going didn't leave. My hand curled up and it didn't stop curling. I couldn't walk straight. When I walked down the office, I would have to bang on the wall to try to stay in the middle of the hallway. So things started getting really bad. And we were on a trip. My wife and I were out here in Colorado visiting my mother. And it was my mother who said, "There's something wrong. Would you look at his face? It doesn't look right." And so she said that she needed my wife to get me to the doctor. And then shortly after I finally did go in to see a neurologist, about 3 months later, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So it took about, 50 years or so for it to manifest itself. And then by the time I was 50 years old, it was really coming on strong. And it beat me up, scared me. I thought I was going to die for about 8 years. But then the medicine change happened, and thankful to my doctor, my multiple sclerosis doctor, Dr. Alan Bowling, world famous MS specialist. He changed my medicine and my condition leveled off, not getting any better and not getting any worse.
What's the mindset like in those years where you're having these little like health scares and spikes, and you're that thought is crossing your mind, like, this, like, at any day now this could finish me off?
Well, it was scary, and it scared me and my poor wife. I was petrified for my wife, but my wife was beside me the whole time. She was confident that we were going to be able to find the right doctor, and she did. She was the one who located all the doctors that did the best work for me. But it was a terrible mental state because, when you're Kid Curry, the guy running the biggest radio station in Miami, you're a pretty famous guy in the radio business. I was a very well-known name, and I was having very big success on a very big radio station. Then suddenly I went from having a cane to crutches to being in a wheelchair. And, when people wanted to be close to Kid Curry, they don't want to be close to the guy that's got a cane or in the wheelchair. So I had a real mental problem, because everybody liked me, and then suddenly nobody wanted to be close to me. So it took me a while to get over that. Eventually, my wife just said, "You got to stop being so mad about being in that wheelchair." And that's really all she had to say. For some reason, it really clicked, and I stopped being so mad about being in the wheelchair. And, the same guy who was running the biggest radio station in Miami is the same guy sitting in this wheelchair. I controlled the room when I was the program director of Power 96. I control the room when I roll in my wheelchair. Everybody looks at you.
Follow your new favorite podcast host with a link in the description.
So, like I said, it was just, it was definitely a mental state to go from being the famous guy to being the guy that nobody wanted to be close to. And, my friends, even the friends I'd had my whole life, everybody stopped calling, and it just really bothered me for a while. But, eventually you realize that life goes on. I want my friends to go on with their lives just like they want me to go on with mine. So, I still hear from the people that matter. That's all that matters.
How does it feel when you sit down and you think about that, how, you were treated a certain way because you had some level of fame, and now you're treated a completely different way because, you have health issues and you're unfortunately stuck in a wheelchair?
Well, that mental state was a real dark place for me. I was always, when I was just a radio DJ, little girls were fawning over me all the time because I was a famous radio DJ. And so I was always, people always paid attention to me, And then when I took over as program director of Power 96 in Miami, again, people wanted to be close to me. But then, when this all crashed, but, it was funny. I think I was more in the beginning, I was more concerned about my physical condition failing. And once my physical condition kind of leveled off and I could see that nothing was really going to happen anymore, that's when I really started wondering about the dark place. How am I supposed to come out of this? How do I once again try to find a new me? Because, I went from being the famous radio guy to the guy who's getting beat up by MS to the guy who suddenly his condition is leveled off. So now what do I do? So that's when I decided that I would become a writer and I would tell my story, because I think I've had a really good radio career. I've got some great stories in my memoir called Come Get Me, Mother, I'm Through. And so it was a great radio career. And I also wanted to talk about, my being diagnosed with a chronic condition. That can happen to anybody at any time. And I wanted to write about the changes I had to go through and the low parts and then the good parts, because I came out of it. But then mostly I wanted to remind people that in this country, we have terrible health care and it's not fair. In my house here, I live in a 3-story home. I have a lift that I have that gets me out of my garage onto the main level of the house. I have another lift on the back part of the house that takes me from the main level down to the back door, so I can go out and enjoy my porch and the grassy area in my backyard. I also have a 3-level Stairmaster that gets me, I sit in the chair and it takes me to all 3 levels of my home. I had to pay for that. I get no government help from that. It's not my fault I'm disabled, but I have to pay to be able to survive. I have to pay to be a normal human being, and I shouldn't have to pay for all of that. I should be able to get some help. But again, we live in America where money rules the Congress. So that's another complaint, just a personal comment.
Do you think there is any way that it could ever be resolved in America? Because the way you explain it is true, and I've had people that I've spoke to, and they've mentioned that that no one should have to pay their own money just to operate in their own house, like regardless if you're sick or not. Like, I don't think that's something that should happen. And even worse, like you mentioned at the start, in America, if you're disabled, you have to almost pay to be disabled.
Yeah. Well, it can change. It's very simple to change. We're in a democracy. I mean, so if the right people voted and they voted for the right party, because one party is not necessarily the type of party that wants to help people, they have a good time hurting people. But if you wanted to vote blue, you could vote in all the blue people, and you could have a Democratic president and a vice president, and he could maybe help win blue seats in the Congress and in the Senate. And but the problem that you have in America is you can have the anti-helpers. Some presidents do whatever they can to help the citizens of the country. Other presidents come in and disrupt things the way they want them. And in this particular case, it's pretty evident that America was different under Barack Obama, and Donald Trump and the Republican Party got all mad because he gave health care to the poor. And so then now you bring in the next party, the Republican Party, the Donald Trump, and he does everything he can to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. So if you had the right people that you voted into office, you could certainly get everything you wanted out of this country, out of the good things you need. Good health care. You could have reasonable gun control. Corporations would at least get taxed a little bit. I mean, I get taxed more than corporations in this country. So, there's a bunch of things that could change, but you have to change it at the ballot box. But now there's so much disinformation. People lie. It's hard to decipher who's telling the truth. And unless you're smart enough to figure out who is telling the truth, you get swayed. We have a bunch of people in this country who I believe are undereducated, and they're easily swayed by cults. And that's just, again, my opinion.
So in your opinion, do you think that's maybe why people aren't voting towards those that are going to make improvements that your country kind of needs? Because just as an outsider looking in, hearing those arguments on both sides, I don't see how people can't see the obvious rational choice, which is to vote for these people that are going to actually make positive changes on the country. Do you think it is the popularity contest is taking over a little bit?
It's a popularity contest. The guy who came slithering down that escalator with the wife he was cheating on, Donald Trump, was a TV host. He had a big TV show. And I know that my sister, who I've lost, I'm estranged from my big sister because of all this, but she loved watching TV. She still watches soap operas. I mean, on TV every day. She at 12 o'clock news, she's watching her General Hospital or whatever. When you're that involved in television, you get swayed easily by the star of the show. And a lot of people in America were swayed easily by the star of The Apprentice. And he then decided that he could go become the president of the United States. And remember, he's Roy Cohen. Never mind. He's had some very negative people in his life who have taught him how to disrupt the process. And that's what Donald Trump is doing. He's disrupting the process. He's trying to destroy America through democracy. And again, I don't know if I should be getting into these. These are all personal opinions. Whatever.
I thought it was actually quite interesting. Obviously, in a lot of my social media accounts, my For You page would be a lot of people from the UK that I would probably interact with their content more because it's more relatable to me. But there was someone that posted on Twitter recently that I couldn't get my head around either, and we had a conversation about it of Trump and another presidential candidate. I can't remember who it was. It's kind of been proven that they're guilty of some kind of legal dispute or something.
Oh,
but
yeah.
We couldn't grasp between the two of us how they would be allowed to still run as president, because in the UK, if you were caught doing something wrong and you get found guilty, you'd have to be removed straight away.
Unfortunately, that rule is not in the Constitution. It doesn't say anything in our Constitution. And all you got to do is be 35 years old and a citizen of America. It says nothing about, you can't be in the military if you're a felon. You can't join the army in America if you're a felon, but you can become president if you're a felon, because it's not in the Constitution, the original Constitution of the United States. And to change that Constitution would be dramatic. It won't change.
I've seen a couple of times this week that they are passing the bill for 18 to 25-year-olds to be drafted into the military.
No, that's not true. That's a falsity. No, not true.
Whoa.
I hate to do this, man, but I've got to wrap this up. I've got my next project I've got to get to. I really enjoyed talking to you. And if you want to redo this again, we can do this some more. I enjoy talking to you. You're a real good interviewer. I do a lot of these podcasts, and you're asking very relevant questions. Most times they're not this good. So if you ever wanted to do this some more, I'd be more than happy to do it with you again. But unfortunately, I've got something I've got to bail on now. That's
no problem at all. I hope you have an amazing day.
Just remember the website for all the details, krcurry.com. Thank you very much for your time today, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Sir, bye-bye.